Hey everybody, welcome to Pianist Academy and another live stream. Woohoo! Great to see so many people here already in the chat. Rhodesy, welcome Rhodesy, Bunny, Sparrow Hawk, Dith, Sir Wolseley, XZY, Antonio, welcome. Awesome, great to see everybody here. I'm trying out my coffee in a different way because after 2 hours, my coffee is normally cold and my last sips on the stream are usually not that great. So, it looks a little different. Morning, Sir Wolseley. Hey, and it seems like everybody, I know in the States we changed times this past Sunday. Bethany, welcome, Bethany. How many other people around the world changed their clocks this weekend? And I'm very happy that we all made it at the right time. I always wonder about that. Oh, we have quite the day today. By the way, Rhodesy, I sent you an email this morning. Rhodesy said you changed in 2 weeks ago. XZY, yes. Italy it changes, awesome. Dith says you always drink cold brew anyway. I like cold brew, but today in Colorado, it's only 40 degrees Fahrenheit, which is probably like 5 degrees Celsius. It's quite cold. We have so much to get through today. It's going to be a lot of fun, actually. We are going to kick things off with Clementi, played by Dith. So Dith said I finally convinced him to send in a recording. So we're going to start off listening to Dith play some Clementi. Then we're going to jump over, after we do some work on that, we're going to jump over and listen to an original composition by Bethany. And then we're going to change gears again and hear Sparrow Hawk play some Chopin later in the class. And then if there's time left at that point, we will definitely open it up for Q&A. Rhodesy says checking emails now. All right, well, let's jump in. Let me get all my stuff ready to go here. So, let's give a good cheer for Dith, even before he plays. I know he's feeling a little nervous. All right, are we ready? So this is going to be Dith playing Clementi, Opus 36, number 2, the third movement. We talked about it just a wee bit 2 weeks ago. So we're going to hear Dith's full performance of that movement. And let's have at it. Awesome work, Dith. Let's give Dith a round of applause in the chat. Most definitely. Really great work. We've been talking about your playing Dith for quite some time. I'm so glad to get to hear you play. Very, very nice work. Very nice work. There's a lot of really good stuff going on. Your scales, I think, maybe they've gotten a lot better in the last 2 weeks, but you seemed concerned about them 2 weeks ago. They're going very well. So congratulations on that, most definitely. I think our talk today is gonna really boil into, I think, 2 categories. Basically 2, but there's going to be multiple components. All right, first things first, a little bit of technique. I've noticed that, Dith, your left hand, when you're changing from playing your normal G triad and then changing to your D in inversion, where my 5th finger in the left hand needs to play an F sharp, our 3rd finger in the left hand is curling under quite a lot. So you're already playing in between G sharp and A sharp. So the finger's in between the black keys already. See if we can let our 3rd finger come to rest in a little bit more natural position. Because our 5th finger has to be on this key, F sharp, there it is. Because it has to be there, there's only so much we can do to put the hand in the correct place on the keyboard. So don't worry about if you're pulling the 3rd finger back because you were trying to play it closer to the front edge of the key. We're doing a little bit too much of that. We can't get it far enough out for it to really make a difference. So instead of playing on the underside, let me show you with my right hand a little demonstration. I'll show you out here on the keys so everybody can kind of see what I'm talking about. Oh, thanks, Scott. It's flannel weather again, yes. And Dith, you said it's mostly that the scales don't feel even. Okay, well, maybe we'll talk about that. Okay, so this 3rd finger stuff, if I show you with the right hand, let's say this is an optimal position to play an A, which we have down here. And it's outside of the keys. It's on the front edge, right? But most importantly, the shape of the curve of the hand is the same as we would desire for optimal playing, right? As we move the finger in, that curve, we don't really want to change. And if we are absolutely necessitated that we have to play further into the key, maybe a chord like that. Okay. Here, my 3rd finger is in between G sharp, A sharp, but I am not working on bringing 3rd finger back. My focus is on keeping the inner fingers with optimal curve, nice foundation, good structure. Yeah, so what we don't want to have happen in Dith, what I was seeing you do a little bit of, was 3rd finger went from very curved to like over curved to the point that we were playing on the nail side of the finger. That's too much. We're going to lose control. And depending on how long your fingernails are, for the ladies that are here, it might not be possible for you to play that far around the other side of the finger, which is good. In Dith, what you'll find is as you start to strike with the nail of the finger, we'll hear clicking, and it's really easy to just slide off the key. That's not great. We lose a lot of control. So that's one thing we want to fix. I've been showing you in right hand, but it happens in the left hand here. Just let the 3rd finger come down in the middle of those 2 black keys. We can't work around that the 3rd finger has to play inside those 2 black keys. Rhodesy asks, is this piece in D major? It's in G major. But D is the 5 chord in G, so a D scale is going to get used a lot. So are D chords, because the harmonic relationship there. Okay, that was the technique thing I wanted to cover, Dith, with the left hand. A lot of your other stuff is looking really nice. Let's talk about articulations and a little bit of character. So I'll put the score up in a second, but first let's just take a listen. A lot of the measures in this piece, in the right hand, a lot of the measures are released with a staccato, or a lot of the phrases are released with staccato. And sometimes, Dith, you're doing a great job of making sure we play that articulation, especially when it's standing alone, like in the very first bar. Those staccatos are nice. And you're playing it in a different articulation, separate from the other hand, the left hand. Where it starts to break down a little bit is that after the end of the second phrase, Oh, am I? Sir Wolseley said I'm lagging a little bit. Just can people let me know? I'm not sure if there's anything I can do to fix that, but people let me know if the audio is funky. I'll keep going. So, staccatos, Dith. So, let me show you, let's do it a couple more times, then I'll show you the score. So, phrases that are ending in staccato, we want to make sure that we really release just as well as we release the staccatos that are standing alone. So that's our right hand phrase, yeah? And then. Okay? So if we put that together with both hands. Okay, now let's take a quick look at the score. Sorry about the lagging problems. It seems like it's different, a little bit different for everybody. Hopefully we won't have too many of those today. Okay, so here we are. Let's make a new layer I can write on. So Dith, these places that I'm talking about are ends of phrases. These little staccatos that happen here in the right hand. A lot of times we are ending up playing a legato articulation, which is going along with the left hand, or maybe we're a little concerned about where the right hand is going after this. So then we end up holding those notes in particular. Or in the next phrase, same. But in this, whenever a composer marks an articulation, especially in the classical period, they are really striking differences. And we should make sure that they're really striking differences. So. Your other ones that I just played through, these ones down here and here, those are sounding better. Maybe a little bit because the right hand and left hand are doing the same thing. But those are great. We just have to apply that to the other phrases, yeah? Okay, let's move on. This is a little bit about character, yes? Because if we get the character right here, then it's a lot more bouncy and bubbly and a little bit more sprightly, let's say, than if we make a lot of legato lines, right? That's a different kind of style of piece. So going along with the talk about character, let's talk about a couple other things. So we've got all these sforzandos written here. We can bring those accents out even more. So. Where we can really land on and fall into those first downbeats of each bar. So you can use a little dropping motion there. You can also use a little rotation to help bring that out, where we rotate into 5. Yeah? Okay. Oh, the RCM book doesn't have... Oh, goodness. It doesn't have those articulations. That's interesting. I think we should add them in. I don't believe I've seen a good score without them. RCM usually does a very good job, though, so I'm a little surprised. Sforzando, what about these, Dith? Does the book have these sforzando in them as well? Doesn't have sforzando either. Interesting. Well, mark it in, because even if it's not there, maybe let's not create a great big accent, especially if you're going to be critiqued based on the RCM score and none others, if that's what the panel that's listening to you is going to have in front of them. But we can still obey a little bit of the intention of time signature by saying, let's fall into downbeats. Yeah. Okay. Let's keep going with this talk about character. And oh, yes. Okay. So here we go. This is down lower on the first page. What about these, Dith? Do we have sforzandi here and here? So those little things. Even if you don't, make a little mark, I'd say, because this is an opportunity to show a bunch of different colors in playing, or textures or timbres. And we can have a phrase that gradually, that has a nice shape, where it starts very strongly and then dies away. Now, something that goes right along with that is what happens, I'll put it in a different color, what happens in the next two bars here. There is nothing really musical marked. The notes change, the harmony changes, yes. Okay, we know what the notes are. But if we think about all of the harmony that we've had so far in the piece, going back to the top, we have a lot of 1, 5, 1, 5, 1, 5, 1, 5. Okay, C is 4. Now we're back in 5. And then this is 5, 1. 1, 7, or secondary dominant in inversion to the 5, or to 1. Getting mixed up on my keys, and then back to 5 for a half cadence. Okay. So we have a lot of 1, 5, a little bit of 4, but lots of 1, 5, 1, 5, 1, 5, 1, 5. We look down the page. We have a phrase that begins where I've underlined those sforzandos on 1, 1, and then a very, very different, unique, new harmony that we haven't had before. And then it goes back to things. Well, it hints at something where we came from, and then it continues on in this A7. A7 is 5 of 5. Okay, that's an important chord. We can usually see where important chords like this are in music because we get accidentals written where there might not otherwise be. So if we see sharps or flats written in, look for color chords. Chords that, harmonies, that as we play through them, give us great opportunity to do something extremely musical with. And a lot of times, composers won't write anything. There won't be any marking to change dynamic or to crescendo or decrescendo, regardless of addition. But we will, and composers will intend for you to hear that we are going from a very stable home chord to something that's quite far away. And then staying there. So how can we make that more interesting instead of just playing through the notes? Two options, I think, in this particular case. We're coming from kind of a strong place. So creating a little bit of ebb and flow, a little bit of movement, where we crescendo up through our run and decrescendo down. That's a great start to highlight that. That's very musical. Another thing that we could do, because we're coming from someplace strong, we could almost make like a subito piano. Right where that harmony changes, right where that color harmony happens. So, strong, predictable, not predictable. Yeah, that adds a lot of interest, and it really draws the listener in. Yeah, So that's something to think about. Explore all of those places, Dith, where you see, go back to the music. I know you're playing from memory, which is great. Go back to the music and see where some of these things happen. Or if you can hear the difference, hear where we're in harmonies that sound further away from home. Or are those different shapes? You're very used to probably feeling 1, 5, 1, 5, right? And when that hand shape changes, that can also be an indicator there's something else that we can do here. If we continue on with that idea, we start to tonicize. I'll come back to define that word in just a minute. But we begin to tonicize A major. And then we're back in D. So why now is D important when we're tonicizing A? So tonicization, it's a big word that means we haven't actually modulated anywhere, but we have changed the feel of where our tonal center is. So instead, the piece is written in the key of G major. Key signature doesn't change, but all of a sudden it feels like, because of the great work the composer has done, it feels like we have changed, and now we're centered in the key of A, right? So if we're here, now we have a little movement around A and back to A, around and back to A, around, back to A, around, back to A. Interesting. Yes? We could also possibly say that we're tonicizing D instead, because A is always resolving to D. So I asked that question. What do A and D have to do with one another? We established this A7 chord where we said there was a change in color, a change in harmony. A7 is the 5 chord in the key of D, which kind of goes back to something maybe that Rhodesy was hearing when they asked earlier, is the piece in D major? There's a whole lot of stuff that resolves to D, even though the key is actually G, right? So when we're resolving to D, perhaps we're tonicizing D. If we're playing a lot of A major over and over again, we could be tonicizing A. It could be a half cadence in A in a different key. The whole point of this is using that little bit of extra theory knowledge to say there are all kinds of extra musical opportunities in this section. Because none of them are actually going home. None of them are resolving us completely. So if I continue to play from where we were talking about. This is like hanging in the air. All of it, and it's marked piano. If it's not marked piano in your score, Dith, we can still musically interpret that this run is a very nice gesture that somewhat cadences, and then we get stuck there. So even if, let's say, I didn't have a score that had dynamics marked in there, these would be things that I would hear and want to create an interpretation around, yeah? So, we're just hanging in air. And then we have forte. So it's very surprising. And there the composer's actually given us, Dith, does it have forte on those big, strong D chords? Hopefully it does, especially you said it has piano earlier. Hopefully we have that juxtaposition of forte against piano, and there is no crescendo. Mezzo forte for you, okay. Okay, still a difference of two dynamics from piano through mezzo piano up to, through mezzo piano up to mezzo forte. So we can still create surprise. As long as we don't, one, as long as we create piano soft enough, and two, as long as we don't accidentally predict our dynamic change. Because there is no crescendo marked, So, stays piano all the way to the end of the bar, and then yeah. That's going to lead me probably to the last bit I have on this piece for you. So, yeah, let's jump over. Okay, so I'm on the second page of this now. And where I have marked here, this says diminuendo in the score, but no, there's no ritardando marked. And this is very similar to where we just played. This is a repeat of the same musical statement that we just heard. So if I start up from this, here we go. From this measure, we're going to hear the same idea. Oh, almost. Okay, now we're in the third line. Diminuendo, no retard. That's very different. Oh, you have a poco writ there. Darn. Okay, then Dith, obey your poco writ. Because the people you're playing it for will be listening for that. But keep it poco, I'd say. So don't create a molto. This would be a molto writ. That's a lot. Yeah, but instead, if it's a poco writ, just a very subtle and gradual slowing down. The really interesting thing and neat thing that I loved about this spot in the score I have that has no ritardando marked is it's the same very, very strong juxtaposition of ideas. And Clementi gives us the break to reset with the fermato that's over the next bar. So if we just get softer, it's much more surprising and very interesting, musically speaking, to do that. Since you have poco writ, obey that poco writ. Okay, let's take a quick moment and talk about some scales. Dith, we may have talked about this last time. I can't remember. If we have, I apologize for reiterating it, but it's an important concept. I would love to see you do more articulation of pitch with more mechanism other than just fingers. Your fingers are working very well. They're in most of the time in a very good position. When we need to, let's say, articulate 4, all of that stuff through 4, 3, and 5, yeah, we can do great work if we practice a little bit of using the wrist to throw the hand in to those notes. And for the time being, if you've got a little time before you have to play this for your exam, forget about the legato articulation. It's much easier in the second bar here. But when we're going through 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 4, 5, try to feel like we can articulate these from the wrist down and slightly detached. So I would start with that, because those figures, even though this isn't a scale passage, those fingers are usually going to be ones that trip us up as we need to move around them. Oh, Motif Music Studios, welcome. Brilliant. Okay, so Dith, a little bit of wrist articulation. We could even, if we had time, we would extend that further up the arm. But let's start with that. And if you feel like, what we should feel like is that it's incredibly easy, especially if we don't try to play legato. It's incredibly easy to play mezzo forte or forte with a simple throw of the wrist and a little bit of finger movement. That is going to lead right into more scale practice. So the end scales, if we can use the same type of practice, detached, throw each note from the wrist, And don't worry about the legato marking. Yeah, that's fast. I'm playing it quickly just to show you the scale, but don't be frustrated if it takes playing at this tempo. Yeah, you say not hitting two keys at the same time. Okay, the way we always start learning this, at least the way I always start teaching my private students this, is start with the third finger. Learn how to release, articulate from the third finger. Wrist activated, third finger down. Third finger is like the anchor of our hand. It's also the longest finger. We don't want to feel like one finger is any stronger than any other finger. They are all equal if we utilize the rest of the mechanism correctly. Yeah? So start with one finger, start with third finger. Try playing that just from the wrist down. Yeah? Notice that even if you go back and rewatch this, there is always also a slight preparatory motion before the wrist actually plays. There's always a little up before it releases. Right? That's going to be a huge help in getting scales, any running passage to articulate more evenly and more effectively. Slow the tempo down, articulate from the wrist, or if you're more advanced than that, higher, even higher in the mechanism from the wrist, and play detached. And don't be afraid of sinking in, right? It takes more control and more practice to play piano than it does to play forte. Forte, we just let, if we're in the right position, we let the hand release into the keys. Playing piano requires restraint. We have to change that technique a little bit. So, good thing for us, a lot of the passages in here that are difficult are forte, or they can be played forte, even if you don't have dynamic markings there. Yep. Okay. So Dith, I hope that helps. Well, I think we should give Dith another round of applause for his performance, because it's quite good. We were just nitpicking a ton of stuff. Yeah, and if you want to rewatch this, Dith, after the stream is finished, stick with the RCM score and what is notated there. And if there are things that you can add that we talked about, things that you can add that aren't in conflict with what's printed in that score, I would add them in. Brilliant. Great. Awesome work, Dith. Okay. Whew. Beautiful. I'm going to grab a quick drink of coffee. We're going to move on to the next segment. Dith, as I get that set up, feel free, if you have a follow-up question about any of that, I'm happy to help out and see where we can go with that. But as you're thinking, Dith, or if you don't have anything, we're going to get ready to listen to an original piece of music by Bethany. I'm so excited for this. Let me get that queued up. Woohoo. So this is a prelude, and it's for the left hand only. Bethany sent over a video that has the sheet music scrolling, so we're going to take a listen through that. That's her. Bethany, it's you playing, right? I'm pretty sure it is. And yeah, we're going to take a listen. There isn't any playing. We won't see any picture of that, but we'll get to follow along with the score, which is very cool in itself. Okay, Dith says all good. So let's move on. Here is Bethany's Prelude in E flat minor. We haven't heard from Hadar in a long time, but I'm sure Hadar would love the key of E flat minor. Beautiful key. And let's take a listen. Oh, let's put some applause in for Bethany. So beautiful. Really, really, really lovely piece of music. Yeah. There are so many places I just smile as I listen to it. It's really great. A lot of really good writing, Bethany. The form is super well constructed. The exploration of harmony, texture, melody is really nice. Yeah, I guess if I'm going to super nitpick some stuff, I mean, I don't really think anything needs to change about this, to be completely honest. Maybe there are a couple things we could learn, but it's absolutely beautiful piece of music. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't want what I'm about to say to negatively impact what you've already done, because it's great, and obviously you've put a tremendous amount of thought into it. Bethany, what's your background, musical background? I would assume that you maybe have studied composition formally. Backwards Fellow, I'll answer that question. Backwards Fellow asked if you're allowed to play it with both hands. And Bethany told me in an email that yes. She wrote it as a study for left hand. I think she said she either hurt or broke a finger in her right hand. And so she wanted to write something or she wanted some music to play with left hand only that wasn't as difficult as Ravel's concerto. So she wrote her own piece, which is brilliant. So Bethany said you had piano lessons but didn't study composition. You were a math major. Awesome. Yes, XZY, brilliant comment there. I absolutely agree. And you slammed your right hand pinky in a car door. Oh. That sounds horrible. Okay. Oh, let me play a little bit of it. And the only there are just a couple tiny little things that we could talk about, I think. So at the beginning of the score, here we are. You say pedal generously, which is a must, obviously, with left hand only rep. I would wonder, because of the resonance, and this would be something that isn't necessarily a right or a wrong, but it's a question. If you were my composition student, it would be a question I'd ask you. Are you okay with the lowest pitch not quite being held for the entire duration of 4 bars? Because let's just say we don't pedal, or I'm just going to leave the pedal down but not play the rest of the harmony. I'll just play the melody on top of this E flat chord, or open. 1, 2, 3. So how do you feel about that, Bethany? Do we have to have that low E flat sounding the whole time? I ask because if we can clear some of your chromatic descending bass line, if we can make that a little bit clearer, we're going to lose a little bit of the low E flat, but I think it potentially could add something to a performance. And so what I'm doing there is very gently, I'll kind of show you with my hand what's happening with the pedal. So the pedal's down, and still down, and then probably in the second bar, maybe in the third bar for sure, the downbeat, slight lift in pedal. And we're probably going to lose all of the E flat resonance. But if we hold the last 2 pitches into across the bar line, we can maintain the this inner texture and the resonance of that across the pedal change. Yeah? So too much. That's a little too much. I wouldn't go quite that far. But it's, what do you think of that? Okay. I can't, don't know if you said you like that about the changing in the pedal or not changing the pedal. So if you could clear that up, that would be great. So it's just the subtlest little bit. Okay, cool, Bethany. Then we have that repeat of material. I absolutely love this next part with our major 6. Oh, so beautiful. I played the wrong notes there, sorry. Okay, compositional question for you, Bethany. This movement that you have in measure 12, this will be helpful, I think, for everybody here. What do you call that? Harmonically speaking. What are you doing there? It's always, I think it's always wonderful to talk with a composer about what they think about harmony. Or anybody who's, I mean, yeah, Bethany, you're a composer. It doesn't matter whether you have a degree in it or not. You write music, you're a composer. It's always interesting to talk with people, and I feel this way because I write so much music myself too, but a lot of times we look at and we watch theory analysis videos online. There are so many of them out there. And we never, it's all a guess about how composers treated their work or what they thought about. This and what Bethany just said is a perfect example of something that I think about all the time, actually. Okay, so we have come up with all these methods of defining what harmonically is going on. And we usually attribute the end result and the extreme harmonic complexity to, let's say, a composer's genius and their like just superior understanding of harmony. And when I'm writing music, and this goes along with what Bethany just said, there are a lot of times we don't think at all about what harmony is that we're actually exploring. We realize that we really liked the way something sounded, and then we write it down. So Bethany said she calls it dissonance, and it was likely improvised. And it's gorgeous, right? Yeah. So, you know, I've had some people analyze, let's say, some of my music, and they say, oh, you used XYZ chord, and you were borrowing from this key and this other key. And I look at people and I say, I don't think about that. I don't think about that at all. I'm thinking about what makes music beautiful. And then if I need to, compositionally, let's say, if I need to figure out what it was that I improvised or what it was that I did that I loved the sound of, X, Z, Y. I didn't. I said X. Yeah. So if I need to go back and analyze in order to be able to repeat it, or in order to be able to vary it, then I'll go back and analyze what happened. But in the meantime, no, it's not always necessary. So I think compositionally we could call this, I'll put it back on screen. Where the arrow is, we could call this simply maybe exploration of minor seconds around our tonal center, which in this case is a C flat major chord. Yeah? It doesn't necessarily have to get a Roman numeral name or a chord name attached. They can simply be neighbor tones or passing tones that are minor second apart. Minor seconds, of course, add a lot of dissonance, which is how Bethany really described it. So I find that kind of stuff super interesting. especially when you can speak with a living composer, because so often we can't. We can't go talk to Bach or Chopin or Liszt or Rachmaninoff. We can't ask them what was in their brain, what was in their mind when they wrote, whatever phrases. So super interesting. Okay, Bethany, one compositional thing that I would love to talk about is, so let's see, XCY said C goes down to C flat, G goes down to G flat is what you heard. Let's see. So we could think about that. Actually, C flat goes up to C natural and then back down because our starting point is C flat. So we have that movement. We also have movement from G flat up to G natural. And they're offset. And then we could call the melody, that's basically diatonic notes in the C flat major chord. I guess it's Lydian. But it's very pretty. Okay, let's jump over to the last page, Bethany. Okay, my only really thing that left me wanting was after all of this beautiful exploration, I'm starting at the top of the page, last two measures of the first line. So this is what we just heard. Yeah. It feels like we get to that ending in measure 70 awfully quickly. Especially coming from this really expansive... And we maintain that harmony. So we get that harmony for 4 bars, new harmony for 2 bars. Back to C flat. So here, I see what you're doing, absolutely. I wonder if we could have done this where we make the texture smaller and we bring all of the writing together, if it could have happened over another 2 or 4 measures. That seems like a super small thing. But to me, it's a little bit about balance, that kind of balance in the composition. It feels a little bit like the ending here. We kind of die away very fast. So maybe there would be an opportunity there to create a little more balance against really the expansiveness of 8 measures earlier and where everything goes. That was really the only thing I heard in the entire composition that made me feel like we could add to. Yeah. So, yeah. So Bethany, you said you kind of agree there. It feels a little sparse. And it's let's think about harmonic rhythm. Yeah. Let me put this back up for us. So if we're at the top of the page, there are changes in harmony. But let's call all of it basically an E flat pedal tone. So we have one harmony over the course of 4 measures, even though there's other things happening. We have that lowest pitch. We have our inner moving notes that are in E flat minor. Our upper melody is diatonic to E flat minor. It's really our bass that's changing, that alludes to something else or provides dissonance. But I don't think it's really changing the underlying structure of harmony. So 4 measures in one harmony. Then we have C flat. 4 measures again. Whoops. And then we have C. So here's the next 2 measures with our added interest. Now, new. going back to C. Everything up to this point I really love. My question is that we have, at a point in the score where we're trying to bring things to a close and that we're trying to create a smaller texture, less expansiveness, and we're trying to slow down. We even have retard written in, and then the next section is more slowly. So we're trying to bring things to a natural end. And when we speed the harmonic rhythm, which is what we've done here, where we have 4, 4, and then 2 measures in a new harmony, 1 measure in a new harmony, 1 measure in a new harmony, and then a new inversion that sounds almost like a new harmony. So we go from 4, 4 to 2 to 1 to 1 to 1 to 1. And when we speed harmonic rhythm, it tends to make us feel like things are getting more exciting. And I think that might be a little bit of where the disconnect happens with the writing, because the writing is getting smaller and smaller notationally, and your registers are coming together, which is brilliant and beautiful, but our harmonic rhythm is kind of doing something that's opposite. And so as it's speeding up, everything else is slowing down or getting smaller. If we could align that, if we could align the harmonic rhythm to be either more steady or not have so many changes, I think that would instantly make that spot click and work. Cool. But, Bethany, I wouldn't change it. You could use this to learn for the next piece you write, but I wouldn't. I don't think I would go back and revise anything. It's a really, really nice piece of music. I think a lot of people here would agree. I don't have anything else, Bethany, for you. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. It was great to hear. Bethany, please feel free in the comments. If you sell the sheet music, feel free to leave a comment under the video here. Maybe not in the chat because people won't see it on the replay, but under the video, leave a comment with a link to your sheet music. Absolutely, because it's such a great piece of music. And I think there are a lot of people that would really enjoy playing it. Let's give Bethany one more round of applause. And then we're going to move on to some Chopin. Oh, and see why? Yes, Bethany, also definitely leave a link to your YouTube channel in the comments below. That would be fantastic. Okay, changing gears from modern and somewhat impressionist to Chopin's final Nocturne. All right. Sparrow, my clap doesn't work. Brilliant, brilliant, awesome. Let's see. Okay, so let's dive into some Chopin. Nocturne. This is Opus 108. We're going to hear Sparrow Hawk play this, and we'll listen to the whole thing. So like I said, this was, let me see. This is the final posthumous published Nocturne of Chopin's. Sir Wolseley, it shows, I don't show any dropped frames on my side. No, sorry, Sir Wolseley. All right, here we go. Let's take a listen to Sparrow Hawk. We'll listen to the entire Chopin Nocturne. Beautiful piece of music. And let's go. brilliant work. Brilliant work, Sparrow. Let's give a round of applause. Oh, awesome. Such great music making today from everybody. This is brilliant. Oh, so there are very few of Chopin's nocturnes that stay so stable in one key and in one tonal center. Hey, welcome back, Rhodesy. This is one of them. I think there are only two other nocturnes in all of Chopin's nocturnes that, well, one, start and end in the same key without changing from minor to major by the ending. And here we have a little bit of maybe tonicization of E flat and the mediant in the middle, which adds a little bit of variety. But it's very, very harmonically stable. And that's going to play a part in everything that we talk about with this piece. So really great work, Sparrow, and great work left hand. There are a couple little missed notes here and there, but it's very difficult to play moving left hand, especially nocturne parts, and have everything sound while we're trying to play it extremely quietly. A little tip for that is just to make sure at any time the left hand is moving that you have really fully achieved the alignment that you want between the fingers, the wrist, and the arm before we play. Because most of the time, a misstrike or a non-sounding note is due to, because you've played long to put through the finger and into the key to don't mess up judging how much energy that is, especially when we're playing music like this. And it's not like it's a mistake in playing forte when we're supposed to play piano. The mistake, if you even call it that, is simply not letting the arm move quite enough. You're doing a great job, but there might be just a little bit more that we can do to make sure that every single one of these pitches sounds, even when we leap an octave. And the reason that's all coming out is because I'm making sure that this arm, let me know if you want to see from the top down, because I can show you, but making sure that this is just transitioning back and forth for all of those pitches and trying desperately not to stretch. So even, for example, I will show you from top down, because this is a great example. We have bars like this in this piece, where we start on C with 5, fingering in the score, which is great that you sent me, and I'll show it in a second here. Shows 3 on G, and then a stretch to 1 and 2. That's quite a difficult fingering for this type of passage. Does it truly make it more legato? Perhaps. The pedal's going to have to be down anyway. But regardless, we cannot hold 5 and this and the next ones. If you've got a massive hand, maybe. But in practicality, we can't hold that while we play. But anytime we're given a fingering like that, where it alludes to this being able to all be played in one hand position, here's my air quotes, we have a tendency to stay stretched instead of allowing 5, 3, 1, 2. Notice how when I play 1 and 2 on the upper notes, the hand is completely relaxed. Because of that, I would actually not even choose to use 3 on the G in the middle here. I would simply play 5, 1, or 5, 2, 1, 2, 5. At the tempo, this is completely accomplished. We can easily accomplish this. To 1, back, and it keeps the hand super relaxed. Even where we have bigger stretches, those. In this score, this is written as to 4, to be played in one position here, and then cross over and back to 1. Those fingerings are fine, but we need to recognize where they can create that spread and the tension in the hand, because it's the spread and the misalignment of the finger that causes those notes to sometimes not sound. And purely that, usually. So if there are ways, even if we don't change the fingering because it's well established, if we can change our motion so that we lead from 5 to 4, and then don't try to hold some of these pitches. But letting the arm move back and forth. Yeah, okay. Okay, let's jump into some more detail. I wrote down a lot of stuff while we were going through and listening to your recording, so don't mind all of the notes that you're going to see. We're going to go through them one at a time. All right. Here we go. So from the top, the first thing I have marked at the top of the page is some rhythm. Your opening was feeling a little bit like, almost like a triplet or like a swung rhythm, like this. Be careful that we're not going too far with the main theme, especially the first time that we hear the main theme. So 1. So if we keep that very, very precise, maybe too precise. Make sure that we know exactly what that rhythm is and that we're not being influenced by our interpretation too much. We can always play with it and add rubato. But we still don't want to pull it too far into triplet type stuff, yeah? Okay, next stuff. So that was the rhythm right in the first bar, first full bar. End of the first line, we have a polka crescendo written, and then I wrote verses with an arrow circled next system measure for hairpin that's opening up. This is a prime example of a place where Chopin has given us what we used to consider conflicting markings, where we have crescendo in one place and then crescendo again, the bar later. Does he mean to crescendo twice? Most likely not. Most likely where polka crescendo is written in bar 3 is where the crescendo actually begins. And then the hairpin, as we've talked about in other streams, the hairpin is a indicator of rubato, not an indicator of dynamic change. So through this group of 12, we would slightly accel maybe to the end of that phrase. I think it would sound better with a slight rounding before we get to the end of the phrase, because I don't think Chopin either would have played straight to the final note, because that's not musical. But if we take that sense of we're going to push through this passage until it resolves, I think that's what that intends. So you'll actually hear a lot of performances where in this particular place we have a crescendo in bar 3, and then we have a decrescendo in bar 4, which we might say, well, it goes against the score, but it might not. Because if those hairpins aren't indicators of dynamic, then we definitely can phrase the melody in a different way. Yeah. You'll also hear plenty of people that do increase and slow down, which I'd argue is not Chopin's intention. But who's to say? We tend to take music literally from the score, and even all of the markings that Chopin put down, especially this was published some more than almost 100 years after Chopin's death. He definitely didn't proofread it. We know that Chopin would have played his own music differently from day to day to day to day to day. These are one set of indicators of rubato that we found in one score, one manuscript or 2 manuscripts. But we know definitely that Chopin would have taught his own students to experiment with that some. So that can be open to interpretation and open to discussion. That's what I'm going for. All right. Let's look at the next little segment. On the third line here, and this is a little bit from your performance, Sparrow, but also in general, Chopin wrote out turns in two different ways throughout his life of publishing music. And in some cases, just so everybody can see where we're looking here, we're looking at this stuff. In some cases, Chopin would have written the little S-looking symbol, yeah? And in those cases, it's purely meant to be an ornament. And there's a lot of, we can play it with a lot of freedom, and a lot of, it's a little bit more flippant when Chopin wrote the turn with the S shape. But when Chopin actually notated out all of the pitches, usually 5, that happen in that turn, it's meant to be played with a lot of intensity and focus on where it's leading to. So it's no longer an ornament, which is why he made the choice to actually notate it instead of writing the symbol. So, for example, if Chopin wrote this turn as an ornament, we might play that. Or that, right? But what he actually wrote with all 5 pitches is almost a slight ritardando, a very, very intense look at all 5 of those notes. So make sure that we play those with great attention. I think if we just give attention to each one of the 5, that's going to be all it needs to turn from just a shape that we kind of pass by to something that's very introspective and very emotional instead. Yeah? Okay. Next up here, we have, if we go back and compare and contrast the first line, the beginning, to this halfway through the third line, we have the same we have all the same content. This is our main theme presented over again. First time is piano. Second time, where I've circled, is pianissimo. And I've written next to that, we need a new color. So, if we're aware that the beginning, and that we don't start the beginning too softly, because it's marked piano, but not pianissimo, not 3 Ps, right? That it's only marked piano. So let's make sure that we play the beginning out just enough that it leaves us room to make the second statement even softer. If we dive into a little bit of Chopin's own thoughts on dynamic markings and kind of how they would translate today, pianissimo in Chopin's writing usually meant almost inaudible, almost completely silent. So in the Nocturnes, we see pianissimo a lot. And it can be very difficult to articulate that and to play with that level of precision at the bottom of the dynamic range. But we can shoot for that, and we can adjust our other dynamics accordingly, okay? So yes, can we aim to play the second statement? Super quietly. Crescendo then. And now we're back to piano. And we can play out a little bit more. You might even, Sparrow, you might think about trying to start your piece from this third system, from the second statement of the main theme, and see if you can find that dynamic and learn where that is and how you crescendo out of it to reach piano. When you find where that piano is, then go back to the beginning and say, well, from bar 1, it's now here. So now, no longer are we trying to hold back nearly as much in measure 1, because we're reserving that for when we have pianissimo marked. Oh, cool. Let's look at the next page real quick. we have some important dynamic changes. So, this is from the very top of the page here. Mezzo forte. Mezzo forte is relatively big dynamic in Chopin's writing. Oh, so Sparrow, you said you tried to differentiate, but you found the beginning too loud most of the time. Yes, it's a fine balance. We want it to be louder than nearly silent. But yeah, it can't be too loud. But also, Sparrow, you have a Yamaha and it's a grand piano. I'm not sure how big of an instrument it is, but let's also remember that when grand pianos are in small spaces, they tend to make everything sound loud. I have a lot of students that especially if they've had like an upright to practice on, and then they have their lesson on a big grand, like mine here is a 6.6. I used to teach on a 7-foot Mason and Hamlin. I've taught on 9-footers, and all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, on the bench there's so much sound happening and it's so much bigger. And then they try to manipulate their technique to match the volume of the instrument that they played and practiced on at home, which is great because they're using their ears and they're trying to recreate what they were working on. The struggle is that when instruments get larger, soft dynamics also get louder, right? We think about, a concert piano on a concert stage. Part of the reason the pianos on concert stages are so big is so that soft dynamics can project through the whole space so that they're not lost. But you put an instrument like that in a small space, like a home, and it sounds excessively loud. But we can remember that what may feel excessive, actually on the instrument itself is not. And that's easier said than done. But it said that we're playing in a bigger space, that the sound needs to project further. Our perception of what appropriate dynamic is changes a whole lot. Because if we know, for example, piano needs to reach 20 rows back, well, we have to play it out at least a little bit. And we're aided by a very, very large instrument. Yeah. And I can absolutely understand the feeling about all of this too, because I find myself even sometimes here when I'm recording, I want to play so softly, and it's so much softer than I'd ever play in a performance. Because I'm trying to respond to the room and what the room is doing. But I need to remember in my practice too, okay, piano here isn't going to sound like piano 20 rows back where I'm playing. So even if we aren't playing music like that, we're not playing in big spaces, we're not performing for an audience, we can still learn from that, and we can still understand that the instrument we have, especially when it's a grand and it's a larger grand piano, the softest that it's capable of is always going to be louder and louder and louder than smaller pianos. So don't try to play something as soft as possible, because then we're losing all of that other dynamic range, right? We need to reserve that soft as possible for those very, very, very specific moments. I think people are usually, just one more thing about that, and we'll get back to the piece, but people are usually very surprised by how loud acoustic grand pianos are. Just naturally, they put out a lot of sound. And if we embrace that and we understand how big forte actually is, then we have a lot of room that we can drop dynamic from there and still be very comfortable. I like to say that mezzo piano to mezzo forte should be us really not trying to manipulate the dynamic at all. It's just what the piano plays when we sink into it. And then when we need to go one dynamic softer than mezzo piano, it's a little bit softer. So you could use that also as a judge on your own instruments for everybody listening. When you just sit down and you play a chord and you just let it happen, that's mezzo piano to mezzo forte. We can judge all of our own individual unique dynamics then on our instruments and our spaces based on that. Okay. Rhodesy, I saw your question. Is this easier than his first Nocturne? You want to get at least one Chopin Nocturne done before 2024, before the end of the year. Sparrow says the husband takes his hearing aids out. Rhodesy, I would say this is a much more emotionally mature nocturne. Technically, it is slightly easier than Opus 9 number 1, but it requires a lot more sensitivity than some of the very, very earliest nocturnes, which are pretty straightforward, I think. Oh, Nancy, my piano has a volume control. That's good. So Rhodesy, I wouldn't, if you want to work on this, it's Opus 108 in C minor. You'd still get to work on some polyrhythms and stuff like that, which would be good. But you can read through it and decide for yourself. But yeah, that's why a lot of what we're talking about with Sparrow today is about emotion, it's about interpretation, it's not about technique, not a whole lot. Okay, let's jump back into the music. Okay, so I'm at the top of the second page. We have every bar here at the beginning of the page has a different dynamic marked. So we have a new statement in the first bar here, 17. So if we really make sure that mezzo forte is on the higher side of dynamic, where we can play it out a little bit more, when we need to change dynamic, we can really create a dramatic difference between what mezzo forte is and piano. And we have the same phrase repeated twice here, and Chopin's given us two different dynamic markings for both initial statements of the phrase, which is, I think, really important. This is the first time, I believe, if we go back and look, it's the first time we've had a dynamic as loud as mezzo forte. So we get to sink in a little bit here for the first time. And then pull way back. Right on the downbeat with the left hand while the right hand holds. Let the change in harmony that happens right on this C. Here we go. Right on that C. Let that change be, it's almost like a subito piano. So, mezzo forte, and then change. Almost like whispered. And then even bigger, forte. And again, right on the C. So I've written in here, listen for the quality of echo. It's not exactly a precise echo of what we heard earlier in the phrase, but we're given that sense that this is either like an afterthought, or it's like a mumbling under our breath, where the first statement is more of an outcry. Outcry is a bit of an aggressive word, but it's more outspoken, and then very introspective. And then even more, and then less. So let's really make a big difference between those dynamics. Okay, moving down the page. There's a word here that's really important and that I think should help dictate actually all of our interpretation for the piece. Onomato first appears in 21. So if we're going to play something that has a little bit more forward movement and it's a little bit more excited and a little bit less sorrowful and introspective, we need to limit it and make sure that we don't do it earlier than this. Definitely that. But make sure that if we're going to play onomato, that it really is not allowed to start until Chopin writes that for us here in measure 21. So if I lead into that again from the top of the page, let's see here. And then Chopin never writes exactly where onomato ends, but I think it's implied by two things. The closing hairpin, which is again probably a rubato marking, and also the natural end of phrase here. And so we won't continue to necessarily play the next measures with as much animation or as much spirit. Maybe a little bit. Yeah. Before we go on to the next little run, let's recap some of that. So, okay, I'm catching up on some of the comments here. Sparrow, you said, that's my story. The loud part is a cranky old man. You're not able to do everything he used to, and the soft is his lady. Calm, relax, darling, just try again. That's nice. I really like that. I really like that story. That's great. On the onomato, you said he's feeling strong again and does a little dance. I like that. That's great. So let's be sure that we don't give the old man in the story, he doesn't get that energy really until onomato comes. So that means the beginning. Here we go. It's just a sad song, and it's very straightforward. And then less. Yeah. So I hope you heard how I was trying to keep that very calm and glassy, very, gosh, it's hard to put into words what was in my mind. The, not monotone, but very just emotionally almost flat. There are tiny little ups and downs, but they're all very contained. And then, when onomato comes, there's actually quite a dramatic change in tempo and in dynamic. And then a return. Yeah. So we want to make sure we continue to juxtapose those two ideas. Okay, there are two last notes, and then we're going to call it a day on this piece. Okay, I have written here under this descending figure right in the middle of the page. We need to continue to feel the intensity of that harmony all the way down the entirety of the run. So from the build, really doesn't drop off in intensity until the end of the measure, or until we get this resolution, partial resolution. And then, yeah, so if we let that harmony dictate that all of this, you could even think about making something like a little bit of a crescendo that comes down to that lower F. We start on this top one. If we think about a crescendo, then we're assured we're not going to get softer through this beautifully intense moment. Yeah? The one that follows this is the opposite. Even though it's going up, it's the opposite feeling. It is almost, it's like a feeling of resignation instead of resoluteness. Okay, one more note for you, Sparrow. Let's, we're going to use some of these same bars. Okay, because this is a great example. So, the bar before intensity, the bar before the descending group of 11, measure 26, we have a lot of notes in the right hand across the first two beats. Now, I know, based on what we saw earlier in the piece, that Chopin has written a lot of pedals that begin on the downbeat. We pedal through half a measure, or we pedal through the entire arpeggiation. And the problem with some of that is if we do that in a bar like 26, it kind of works, but there's a whole lot of blur that's happening in the melody. And even here, it's okay, but the F, that's a non-chord tone, the D sharp, that's a non-chord tone, those all blur together, and if we were to play all of those pitches, that doesn't sound like Chopin. That sounds very experimental. So we can get around some of that if we manipulate our pedaling a little bit. Notice how here the right hand is completely clean, but the left hand is still all of this. I did it again. Wrong page. All of this is still ringing. There it goes. Yes? But the right hand is completely clean. That is because we're mixing finger legato, finger sustain, where the right hand is stuck, left hand is stuck in, and there's actually very little pedal, little to no pedal happening for the right hand to play with. I might add a little bit. Yeah? So we could look for a huge number of places that we can incorporate something like that throughout this piece that will really help to clean up the right hand and to keep the melody nice and clear and nice and focused. It's like some of those, where we have these great runs, I think we can play with having some more pedal changes. We're going to lose the lowest note. It's not going to be sustained. But we need to balance that against the importance of the melody and the importance of showing that direction. That little spot that I just played, there are even recordings. Earl Wild's recording comes to mind. He plays it actually detached, completely detached. Which is interesting. That's really not what Chopin wrote. But that is kind of an extreme example of keeping the right hand clean. So how can we work on releasing pedal? The beginning is simple. We can hold as marked. But this is in the middle of measure 2. We should probably take more pedal. Okay, So that's the last little bit. Look for those areas, especially areas where the right hand is more contained, where we can actually finger sustain all of those pitches. Look for places like that where we can super clean up the pedal, because it'll keep it sounding more like Chopin and less like a piece from 100 years later. Chopin wrote some pedal markings in his scores, and sometimes he didn't. So I would have to do more research to find out if the markings that are on the first line that are in this is Paderewski, so it's a great addition, but I want to do more research to find out if they're truly Chopin's or if they're an editor's marks. Because I don't like all of the blur that happens, and I don't know if Chopin would have liked that either. Sparrow, comment on the final chord. Yes, you had a question about that. We have a rolled chord that ends. Okay, the most typical way that we are going to play rolled chords like this is that if only one hand gets the roll, in this case the left hand is given those notes, the right hand does not have the marking, we will align the top note of the left hand and the right hand on the beat. So that's why you'll hear that. The E flat in the left hand and the C in the right hand will be articulated together. You could, because Chopin wrote a roll to begin with, there could be some argument that you could roll the whole thing, because rolling an entire chord between the hands I don't think it was ever marked by composers from this era. That's not to say that they didn't play their music that way, though. But we would never see a roll marking from this period that crosses the staves and goes between bass clef, treble clef, or between the hands, what the hands are being told to do. So that's why you'll hear some recordings that roll completely up to the right hand, and other recordings that play the more traditional, where right hand and the top of the left hand articulate together. It's always the end of the roll that happens on beat. That's true no matter what. So we would never play that would be not normal to articulate the low note and the upper note at the same time. You might be able to find some recordings of people who have done that, but they'd be few and far between, and they're taking a great deal of liberty with their interpretation of that. So I hope that clarifies that question about rolls and when to start and end them. So yeah, you say the not normal version of that, or maybe that one as well. Yeah, I'm sure we'll see various approaches. But if you listen to probably many of the biggest concert pianists, the most well-known, they're going to play top note of the left with the right together. Okay, brilliant. Let me make sure. Great, I don't think I missed anything. Let's give Sparrow Hawk a round of applause. Oh, I feel like we really dug deep on that. But there are so many things that we could talk about. Yes. Oh, well, thank you, Sparrow. Dith, yes, absolutely. We've got a few minutes left, so yes, if people have, especially people that if you haven't, had a piece in the class today, please, let's say we've got about 15 minutes. I can take some questions. But absolutely, clap, clap, clap. Great playing, Sparrow. Really nice. So let me answer this question, and let's feel free, drop some questions in the chat if you've got them. So Dith said, you just remembered you had a question going back to a comment about curved fingers. You could use some tips for making my fingers fit better between the black keys. Oh, that's so Dith. Can you Do your fingers fit between them? Plain and simple. Can you put a finger between them? I think obviously you can. Yes. And are some fingers easier to do that with than others? You say it tends to get tight in there. I think that's why I overcurve. Here, if it's any resolution for you, I'll show you this from the top-down view. Maybe you can see this, but my third finger, the sides of my third finger are completely touching F sharp and G sharp here. So I can articulate G only, but on the way down, my third finger's definitely touching the other two notes. So I need to be very precise about my, the motion into the key needs to be very vertical. I can't go from side to side at all, because if I do, I might play another pitch. Yeah? But there is nothing I can do to change my physiology. My third finger is always going to be a tight fit. It fits, but just barely. Second finger is a little easier. Fourth finger is about the same as the third finger. Both hands are like that. So they fit, but just barely, let's say. The only thing I can do is make sure that that motion playing the key is always very vertical. So that's an E flat chord with second finger in the middle. If I play it in inversion with 4, I need that fourth finger to really be sure that it's straight down. If I play with 3, yeah. I haven't thought about that in a really long time. But there isn't really anything that we can do to change. We can't change our hands. We have what we have. So first off, just be thankful that your fingers do fit between the keys, because there are some people that if your fingers don't fit between the keys, it simply limits the repertoire that we can play and what we can play, because there's nothing we can do to change our physiology. Yeah, and beyond that, a very vertical attack. But remember, you said you're tending to overcurve because of that, but overcurving isn't actually pulling your finger out from in between the keys. So it's not accomplishing getting the finger out to make it maybe more comfortable. Therefore, we just stop curving like that. Yeah. Dith said you had to buy a new piano because you couldn't fit between the keys with your old one. Yeah. There are still some keyboards that are made. And there's actually a little bit of something coming back with making pianos and keyboards that have smaller key sizes. Because earlier period instruments, actually the width of keys themselves were not as wide as they are today. For a lot of people, that actually helps. It helps them to play. If there isn't as much distance, if the keys aren't as wide, then it's easier to reach an octave, it's easier to reach a ninth, 10th, etc. But for those of us that do have large hands, where an octave on the modern piano is not difficult, it makes fitting between the keys impossible sometimes. So there is some of that to consider. Let's see here. Let's see. Bunny said, can I send a video to you via YouTube link? I can't play. It's not that I can't, but I usually don't play YouTube linked videos on the stream because I can't prevent ads from happening, and I can't prevent, I don't want to advertise another company or something, or I can't control the content that gets shown. That's plain and simple. So because of that, I don't show links from YouTube. even if you're on a channel that's not monetized, YouTube will still show ads on it, and they'll just pay the money to another creator. So even if your video is not monetized, even if your channel's not monetized, there will still be an ad shown, and I can't control that. And sometimes, if we might be in the middle of playing back something, and YouTube will say, "Oh, we didn't put an ad recently enough," and it'll put one right in the video, right in the middle of it, which would kind of just mess everything up. So, Bunny, Google Drive and Dropbox are the two most common ways to send links, and I'm assuming, yeah, that's why you are asking about this. If you have a Google email address, you have a Google Drive. If you don't, you could either easily sign up for a Google email address and get a Google Drive with 15 gigs of data, or you could sign up for Dropbox, and I think you get 2 gigs for free with Dropbox, which is more than enough to share a video, just one. So those would be the 2 ways. I know a few other people that have used a different platform. So feel free to drop that in. For example, Sparrow used a different platform to send me the video and sheet music. So Sparrow, if you're here, and you can drop the name of that platform, and that would be helpful. Mega Upload. Thanks, Sparrow. I have another. This one might need a subscription, but I have another student of mine that uses Proton Drive to send. It kind of bundles files together and sends it. I think it's encrypted, so it might require a subscription. But you can check it out. If it doesn't require one, then you could use that also. Okay. Let's see. XZY says, oh, by the way, if you haven't clicked the thumbs up button, please click the thumbs up button. XZY says, how much of a difference does partial pedaling make? A 6th or an 8th pedal, for example. When would you push the pedal fully, and when would you push the pedal not all the way? Okay, let me start with the end of your question. I almost never have the pedal fully depressed when I play. I don't have a great way of showing you that on the stream, but every piano is going to be different, and the regulation of different instruments is different. I personally love instruments where there's a lot of clearance above the strings, where the dampers, so as the dampers lift, I like pianos that have a lot of clearance between the dampers and the strings, and there's a lot of pedal movement that can go along with that. There are some concert instruments that are made where the depression, only when the pedal's fully depressed are the dampers clear. And then as you start to release, you get that immediate contact. I find that much more difficult to control. But perhaps that's because I don't have that to practice on all the time. Okay, so that said, you have to listen to your instrument first and figure out what the regulation is. If you can look while you're pressing the pedal, that tells you everything you need to know. So second part of that, I said I almost never have the pedal fully depressed because when the pedal's fully depressed, there is a lot of travel that the pedal needs to go through. There's a lot of distance the pedal needs to travel before a change begins to happen. And so I try to keep, unless I know that it's like a really big passage, or I'm going to have the pedal down for bars, or my changes are going to be full and complete, where I'm not trying to do half pedals or partial pedals. In those cases where the changes are complete and simple, straightforward, cut and dry, usually forte playing or bigger, then the pedal goes all the way down. It's very stable. But any other time that it's not like that, I try to depress the pedal to the point where the strings are all cleared, but I'm very close to the point where contact is going to happen again. And that way, very small movements of the foot can create those partial pedals. So I don't have to go search from fully depressed and then start to release and go, oh, nothing's happening, nothing's happening, nothing's happening. And then in performance, your foot starts to speed up when nothing's happening over, a beat too long or 2 beats too long. And then all of a sudden, and then we lose everything. So in order to, thank you, Christopher. I appreciate that. In order to alleviate some of that problem, and in order to have a lot more control and know exactly when I lift, I'm going to get certain types of release or certain types of dampening, I'm going to keep the foot closer to that point. We don't want to do that with a foot under tension. So we have to learn to recognize that when we depress the pedal, it's almost happens in much the same way as we play the piano, in that we're not pushing. We rarely need to push the pedal down. If we're seated correctly, it's almost just the slightest activation, and the pedal falls. Yeah? And so we want to be aware of that and know that if we're pushing really hard down and into the pedal, it's going to make it a lot harder to release, and to release with ease and and graduation. Okay, and then the last part of your question, how much of a difference does partial pedaling make, especially, let's say, a sixth or an eighth of a pedal? I usually won't go that, technically, yes, pedal has infinite gradations. I usually don't think about more than full depression of pedal, 3/4 pedal, half pedal, and 1/4 pedal, no pedal. The rest of the gradations are, I can't even think of a piece of repertoire where they'd really be necessary. And also, I mean, it can be good to have a sense of that much control, because as we change from instrument to instrument, if you're performing, the way the pedal works is going to change. And so if we have great control over partial pedaling, then we can adjust where our half pedal happens and where our 1/4 pedal happens, where we're not so locked into just how it feels on our practice instrument. But I don't think I would ever think of or even notate or teach a sixth pedal or an eighth of a pedal change. There are way too many variables. One is just the instrument itself, and a sixth of a partial pedal is going to sound completely different on every different piano. And even concert hall pianos are not always in regulation good enough to accurately show that. But half pedal for sure. The way a lot of pianists get around even having to think about those fine gradations of partial pedaling is by using flutter pedal technique. So where the pedal is always transitioning between nearly fully engaged and, let's say, like half pedal or 1/4 pedal. So never being fully released, never being fully engaged, and quickly going back and forth between those, because then we get to sustain some information for longer, and we're kind of always passing through those fine points. So I hope that answers your question. Bethany, thanks so much for joining. Absolutely. Oh, and thanks, Christopher, for the comment. I appreciate it. So XCY, I hope that helps. For example, since Bethany's just signing off, in Bethany's pieces for left hand only, they require a lot of fine pedal control and a lot of that middle partial pedal control. More so than probably most other things in the repertoire. But if we get into impressionist and other more modern styles of composition, we'll utilize more and more of it. But I don't think you need to think about more than half pedal and the 1/4 variations of pedaling. Oh, cool. I think, was that all the questions? Yeah, my pleasure, XCY. Oh, I think that was everybody's question. Is there anything else that we can chat about real quick? I missed one. Oh, I think Seth's question. Seth's question about sight reading rhythm. I think that's the one I missed. So I'll answer this one, and then okay, I'll answer Sparrow's as well, and then we'll do those two and call it a day. Okay. So Seth's question said, "What advice would you give for learning to sight read rhythm? You've been relying on listening to pieces to get the rhythm because your counting's not good." Okay. I would work on. See if you can find rhythmic examples that don't include pitches, that don't include notes. So can you find sight reading examples, let's say, that might be given to drum majors or like state auditions for high schoolers, for percussionists. And I'd start with stuff like that. Can you sight read, and let's just work on basic rhythmic values. Can we go between quarters and eighths? Can we go between quarters, eighths, and sixteenths, and half notes? And let's purely focus on those first, without notation, without worrying about pitches. If you're taking drum lessons, well, brilliant. That should help a lot. As long as you're also reading notation in your drum lessons, because I know a lot of drum lessons they don't use notation at all. It's just all ear training, rhythmic ear training. So see if you can use some notation as if your teacher isn't using that. And then what you could do is you could go through some basic sight reading stuff for the piano, but try to eliminate the notational component. And can we pick one pitch on the piano or two pitches and just play the rhythm? Just play the rhythm that's given to you. Third tip, I guess I'll give you, is always look for, in your example or in the passage that you're working on rhythmically, always look for the fastest rhythmic value that is given to you. So in a lot of pieces, that's going to be a 16th note. So when we look for that, then we say, okay, I have 16ths or I have eighths to play, one of the two usually. And I'm going to count then every beat with all of the subdivisions needed to give a placeholder for the fastest beat subdivision. So if we have 16ths, even if you need to hold a half note for two beats, we count 1 E and 2 E and we make sure that every one of those 16th subdivisions gets its marker. And then we can go through any iteration of rhythm because every value will have a counted marker. It's going to make it a lot easier for us to fit those where they need to be. So when we need to count dotted rhythms, of course, part of this comes down to simply recognizing how many beats are in various different dotted rhythms. But if we have a dotted eighth note, it's going to be 3 counts of those in the 16th subdivision. So 1 E and then typically the will be a 16th that follows. Yeah. So always look for that smallest subdivision, count everything, and don't try to go between counting different rhythmic values. Even if it feels like your quarter notes or your half notes or your whole notes, if they feel long, just accept that. They are long, and continue to count all of the 16th subdivisions in the meantime. If you're working on more advanced stuff that has further, like 30-second subdivisions, use those 30-second notes to create all of our rhythmic placeholders. That would be my primary advice for learning rhythm better. You say you do that all the time. Okay. Take 10 minutes, 15 minutes to purely think about rhythm each time you sit down to practice without the worry of, again, I would remove notes and pitch from the equation and just worry about the rhythm that you need to execute. It's only, with all the things you're doing, it's only a matter of practice time, really, that's going to continue to make it better, because it seems like you're doing, skipping subdivisions. Don't do that. My student, anytime I hear a student skip subdivisions, they invariably mess up the rhythm, because then as the subdivision changes, the inner pulse doesn't. And so things start to become twice as fast or twice as slow. Yeah, cool. Bachward's Fellow says counting with a metronome. Yes, counting with a metronome. If you're taking drum lessons, you probably have a pretty good sense of inner pulse. And especially if you've been playing the piano for a while, you probably have a good sense of inner pulse. So you can also set, to kind of jump onto what Bachward's Fellow suggested, you can set a metronome to count all of those subdivisions for you. So, for example, if we need to count 16th notes, and our quarter note is 60 beats per minute, multiply quarter note by 4, 240. So if we set our metronome to 240 beats per minute, we're going to get a metronome that counts all of the individual subdivisions. Some apps also, you can set up subdivisions to be counted for you just by clicking a button. You don't have to do the math. Seth, if you have a terrible sense of inner pulse, I would personally try to learn some conducting patterns. Learn how to count 4/4 and show 4/4 visually with an arm. So away from the keyboard. Yeah, we don't have to go into super advanced conducting, but can you show 1, 2, 3, 4? 1, 2, 3. And then we're moving through space. That can be a great solution to feeling, because here's another thing to do. If you're at the piano or you have a table nearby, when you conduct a pattern in 4, you'll have to look up the shape to follow. But can we hit, let's say, the fall board for every beat? So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah? I would definitely work on that. That's some way that we can incorporate more movement from the body into feeling pulse. That's going to help build that inner sense of pulse. Rhodesy, I don't know if I saw your message. If it was about Opus 9, number 1, that's the last message I think I saw. So, yeah, Seth, I hope that helps. We should do a class on here about conducting patterns. That actually helps all pianists. Okay, Sparrow, your question was, suppose you were my piano teacher in real life, what would you suggest that I study next for rep? Oh, gosh. That depends on so many things and on what you've studied already and haven't. Sparrow, I'd love to hear you play some Debussy, some true impressionist Debussy. That would be great. I don't mean like skip Gollywog's Cakewalk unless if you've already played it, great. But something, one of the preludes, one of the easier Debussy preludes. The first arabesque. You said you bought Clair de Lune. Great. Yeah, that would be a beautiful one. Or Reverie. Those are good ones. What about Bach? How much Bach have you played? And where has it led you to? Have you played the Inventions, for example? Dith says you're warming up to hot cross buns. Sparrow, if you haven't played Bach, we really need to play some Bach. Yeah. I'm sorry. But there is so much beauty in it, really. So I would take a look at some of the Inventions. Even if you haven't played Bach before, the Inventions aren't going to be too big of a leap to get started. Yeah. You could potentially look at some of the easier Scarlatti pieces as well, but I think Bach is more worth your time at the beginning. Bachward's fellow says Debussy's Grow with the Flaxen Hair, yes. Bach? No. Bach, well, I mean, no. Let's say no. Bach never wrote romantic music. We can find romance in Bach's music, but it takes looking. So yeah, those are the places I'd go. Let's explore some other periods of music, and especially if there are ones that you haven't explored before. So Baroque, more impressionist or contemporary. That's where I would love to see your repertoire go. Don't work on it exclusively. Don't work on one Bach piece and nothing else. Keep the other stuff in, especially if you feel like you don't love Bach yet. Yeah, just intersperse it with some of your other work. Rhodesy, your question, so we'll call it a day after this. I don't think I have any more of an answer for you. Your question was, you're too impatient with Opus 9 number 1, and you want to play the piece perfectly. Okay, so Rhodesy, I believe I gave you that suggestion 2 weeks ago. If I were to give Chopin's Opus 9 number 1 to a student of mine, I would expect minimum of 4 months, probably, unless they're outrageously talented. I would expect a minimum of 4 months on that piece. Maybe longer, maybe 6, maybe 8, maybe a year. Yeah. So 2 weeks, let's put things in context and in perspective. 2 weeks is an incredibly short amount of time to work on a piece of music. And so we should be trying to build a sense of, we should be looking for the little things that we do accomplish each day, one day at a time. And you said you hate connecting all the notes. It sounds like you might be trying to learn too much of the piece all at once. If I were to learn a Chopin Nocturne, let's say I've never played one of them and I were to learn it, the very first day I sit down with the music, I would read through the whole piece. And then I would use the information gathered to identify the maybe most difficult segments. I'm talking about like 8 to 16 bar segments. Probably 1 or 2 of those. Okay, I'm going to make a note mentally or on paper or on my tablet. I need to practice those daily. Those 16 bars get work every day. I'm going to go back to the beginning then, and I'm going to work on the first phrase and only the first phrase on the first day. Probably the second day. Took you 20 minutes to figure out half the notes in the first page. So kind of what I'm saying is I almost sight read the Chopin Nocturne that Sparrow was working on. I looked at it a bit before we started the session to just be completely transparent for everybody. But if I were to practice that, I wouldn't practice, at my level, I wouldn't practice more than page 1 in a day. And I would work on page 1 for probably 30 minutes. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5. I might start to throw something else in a week later. But that's an extremely small number of notes. It's a very, very small amount of material to digest. So no matter how much repertoire I'm working on, things are always getting digested and learned in those small increments. When we try to cram too much more in, what happens is we never really learn the material anywhere all that well. And that might be a little bit of what you're experiencing, in that if we do a lot and let's say we work really hard and we've got 20 minutes and we go through 30 measures. If we haven't gotten very good technique and good phrasing on all of those 30 measures, any of the bits that we haven't, they're not going to stick very well for us. Maybe challenge yourself in this way, Rhodesy. Synthesia, I don't think that'll help you really. It's still reading, it's just in a different form. How quickly can you memorize the phrases? And try not to allow yourself to move on to phrase 2 until phrase 1 is memorized. Not just memorized notes and rhythms, but also you know where the phrase marks are, you know where the articulations are, you know where the dynamic changes are. So, can we memorize an 8-bar phrase in 30 minutes on one day? All of a sudden, that's a much bigger challenge than just saying, I'm going to try to learn something, and I'm going to learn it quickly. Yeah. I would give yourself that challenge. You don't let yourself... Rhodesy, you probably just haven't worked the muscle hard enough. Because what you'll find is that memorizing takes an extreme amount of concentration, focus, and repetition. And really what memorization is telling us is, to a point, when something becomes memorized, we've truly learned it. And up until that point, if we're needing to read the notes off the page, we haven't fully digested the music or what it's about. So I would challenge yourself in that way. And actually take comfort in the fact that it can take a while to memorize small chunks. It takes everybody a while to memorize small chunks. The people that are better at it are, one, either born with an amazing ear where they never had to train it before, or two, they have spent a tremendous amount of time and energy training their ear to be able to remember music and training their hands to work accordingly with it. So, gosh, I think that's where I'll leave that. Yeah, and it just said a whole year. Woof. So I can't tell you how many pieces I've spent multiple years working on. Sometimes daily practice. So it's not an overstatement. Gosh, when I was working on Beethoven's Appassionata, granted, it's a long piece of music, but I took regular lessons on it for 3 years. Not every week, but 3 years I took regular lessons on it. So if we put all that in perspective, when we want to achieve the things that are bigger, greater, that push us wherever we are currently, when we want to achieve those things, it takes a lot of time and a lot of practice. Bunny says, you think age makes a difference? I'd agree with that, especially if you didn't have an experience of learning music younger to begin with. It definitely it can make a difference. Yeah. So let's end it there for today. If there is a piece of music, this is one really important thing, and it's easier for those of us that want to just play for fun. But if there's a piece of music you don't like to play or to practice, it's going to take so much more effort to stay consistent with your practice and stay focused. And so if you have that choice about what you want to work on, make sure that everything you choose is enjoyable and it is fun to work on, and that you're going to look forward to getting to sit down to work on it and play it and practice it and make it better. And if there are things you need to play that you don't particularly enjoy, your job is to find the aspects of them that you do enjoy and latch on to those, because all music does have beauty in it. Okay, Rhodesy, sounds good. Hey, Bedlington Groomer, we're just about to wrap up. So she asks, how do you know when you're practicing a part too much so you're spinning your wheels? Generally, that happens about 5 to 10 minutes. 5 to 10 minutes after working on one small section is enough or too much. And we need to move on and mix it up for next time, or for the rest of our practice session. And then if you want to, come back to it later. Come back to it an hour later and do another 5 or 10 minutes. But yeah, if we're working on one phrase or one section or one passage, we need to keep it to a short enough period of time that, or we need to change how we're thinking about it, so that every 5 minutes, let's say 5 minutes, we worked on articulation. And then the next 5 minutes playing the same notes, we're working on dynamics and phrasing. And then the next 5 minutes, we're creating an image. And then the next 5 minutes, we're maybe changing it completely to be totally different. And we're saying maybe we're going to play it twice as fast, or we're going to play it twice as slow. So if you really want to spend all of that time, we need to keep the practice varied, because the brain turns off and stops accepting information very quickly. And that's what we want to avoid, is just like hammering something over and over and over again. If it's not done with the right intention, and if we're not doing things to keep our mind engaged and interested, we're going to end up coming back the next day, and it's going to be no better or almost no better. Okay. Oh, what a class. This was good. So much good music today. So thanks to everybody that submitted. I think we've some of those people have signed off. But Sparrow, I know you're still here. Thanks for being here the whole time and sending in a really lovely performance of Chopin. Bethany did such a great job. And if you're tuning in now and you didn't hear Bethany's original piece, go back and watch the replay. It's gorgeous, gorgeous and beautiful. And we kicked things off with Dith. And I think Dith might still be here, or was here for almost the whole time. Dith is still here. There we go. Dith, thanks for being here the whole time. And great job, great work with your Clementi. So really, really good. And I'll continue to look forward to hearing all of you play again. Awesome. Well, thanks again. If you didn't click that thumbs up button, please be sure and click the thumbs up button. We do these every 2 weeks. There's information in the description below. Oh, Dith is better than that. Better than that. So check out that info in the description below. Just a quick little pitch. If you're into Christmas music and you want to learn some really cool Christmas music, there's a link below in the description also. All right, everybody. We do these every 2 weeks. I'll see you 2 weeks from now. And Roadsy, be sure and email me. I know that these slots for some of these sometimes go super fast, which is exciting and awesome, but also be sure if you'd like to have some of your playing on the next stream, be sure and get me a video quickly. Thanks, XCY, for being here. Bedlington Groomer, great to see you again. And all right, practice smarter, not harder. I think that wraps us up perfectly today. And I'll see you next time.